May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O God, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. I always get a little bit nervous when people who've been studying the Bible longer than I've been alive do the lay leader position, because they're so much smarter and more well-learned than I am. And so when Sarah was offering the history lesson, I was like, well, there goes about a third of my sermon. It's not true. You did a wonderful job teeing me up. So thank you. I appreciate it. So the prophet Amos, as so often happens in the lectionary, we're only getting a snippet of the overall context of what's going on. We get these 10 verses and then we're supposed to make sense of them, but really, especially in a singular book, there is a narrative that this tiny chapter is coming out of, this section of verses. This, if you want your 10-cent seminary word, this pericope, like this small section that we're working with today. So I want to go back and kind of get some context for where this reading is coming from, which involves a kind of detailed explanation, or we're going to be as high level as possible, of what's going on politically in the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. So we have David, right? One of the first kings of Israel. We have Saul, another guy, and then David. That other guy only lasted about a year. And then we have David and then Solomon. So David is a man after God's own heart. That's the language used about him in the Bible, kind of set up there by God, like anointed by the prophet at the time, like very well loved. There's some reading in between the lines about David's character, but that might be another sermon. So then we have Solomon, who is David's son, who is known for his finery, kind of his opulence. He's really he's a big spender. He really likes the position of being the king and everything that goes with that. And he levies some pretty significant taxes to kind of support his lifestyle, we'll say. So that's happening. And then Jeroboam, who is in this section of scripture, was one of Solomon's kind of attendees. So he's kind of an inner person in Solomon's court. Solomon dies, and his son kind of comes up into leadership, who, just to make matters a little bit more confusing, his name is Rehoboam, as opposed to Jeroboam. So, keep those straight. And Jeroboam comes to him and he says, hey, can we have lower taxes? The tax burden is just too great on your normal everyday person, and they're not able to thrive. Can we have that? And Rehoboam's like, no. So then there is a political struggle, and Jeroboam goes away, kind of rallies some people to his cause, and then sets up camp, basically, and sets up his own kingdom. And 10 out of 12 of the tribes of Israel go toward the northern kingdom. So that's actually what the northern kingdom's known as the kingdom of Israel, southern kingdom is known as the kingdom of Judah. Okay, so now there's two kind of parallel royal lines happening, which is, as Sarah said, we're working with the northern kingdom, which is the lion's share of the people of Israel, right? So is that a good Cliff Notes version? Okay, great. The Bible scholar has signed off. Excellent. So then Amos, as it says in the text, he is a herdsman. He's a shepherd. He's just kind of a normal, everyday person, and God calls him and says, as God says to most of the prophets, hey, I got something you gotta say, and it's on you, buddy. And Amos is like, well, okay, then. What are we in for? So earlier in Amos 5, you start to get what God is pretty ticked off about, and it is specifically that this northern kingdom, even though they were upset at the southern kingdom for extracting their labor and their wealth, turns out they're doing the exact same thing to the poor people in their own kingdom. So it's like that idea of you spot it, you got it. Like your problems with other people might indicate some of the problems you actually have for yourself. they are exploiting the widow, they're exploiting the orphan, they're not welcoming the foreigner in their land. They're just not doing things as God has asked them to do, how God has asked them to care for the people in like under their rule. So then, and we get in Amos 5 that they are observing all of the religious ritual perfectly. They're doing all of the new moon festivals and they're singing all of the songs and they're observing all of the ritual. And God is saying, literally, your incense smells like to me. Like, I don't want you to make a burnt offering to me because your actions and your ritual, your religion, and the way that you treat people are mismatched. So God is really upset about how people are being treated, and you can cross all of the ritual T's that you want. You can observe it perfectly, but if your actions, the way that you're caring for people, if your society doesn't actually undergird what your ritual is, I don't want it. Fast forward, so that's Amos 5. Fast forward to Amos 7. We started with this image of the plumb line, but it is actually the third of a three-part kind of discourse between Amos and God. The first one, God's like, all right, it's over. I'm sending locusts. We're just going to lay waste to this whole place. And Amos is like, okay, God. You know, he's kind of in this position of most of the prophets are of understanding where the people are coming from and understanding where God is coming from and trying to make sense of living in between both. He's got a foot in both camps. So he turns to God and he says, God, people are so small. They are trying, but they're not able to do all of the things that you expect of them. They're not always living up to what their stated values are. They're so small. He highlights human capacity, human finitude. We try and we fail. And God says, all right, fine, no locusts. God comes back and says, all right, I'm over it. Fire. We're just going to lay waste to the whole thing. And Amos says, no, really, we really are really small. Like, don't do this to us. You are perfect. You are wise. You are good. And we can't live up to that. And so God's like, all right, fine, no fire. Then we get this third discourse between Amos and God, where God says, I am putting a plumb line in the midst of my people. So Sarah, can I borrow your plumb line? I like the visual. Okay, wow, it's heavy. Which is the point, I guess. All right, we're gonna do it this way. So, plumb line. What's it meant for? What does it do? Keeps you straight, right? Yeah, it is a vertical line. This is a heavy weight that is going to always point directly up and down. This is a tool that is only used for building something. So instead of offering locusts and fire, a tool of destruction, God says, okay, I'm going to offer you a tool of measurement. What are you building? And how are you building it? And is that a sustainable way to be in relationship, be in community? And then we'll see what happens. So I don't read the idea that the high places are going to be laid waste. I don't necessarily read that as God being like, taking God's big old foot and, squishing anything. The wall has been built not to stand. It has been built wrong. It's going to fall. So it is a statement of fact, not a statement of judgment. Here is a measurement. The way that I have asked you to be in community with one another, when you build your community according to this measurement, things will generally go well. If you don't, if you think you build a retaining wall without some kind of level or some kind of plumb line, it's going to be off kilter. It's going to fall over. And so instead of God actively, setting things on fire, God is saying there's consequences to the ways that you are in community. Now, it's important to know, especially because we are juxtaposing this with the tale of the Good Samaritan, right? So one thing that's important to know, one factor throughout the Israelite history is that they are colonized several times. Invaders come in, they lay waste to everything, take people into exile. Like there's a lot of violence that really defines what is happening for the Israelite people. And what Amos is possibly alluding to is another invader coming in and laying waste to everything. So we understand the Israelite exile as a time when there was some discussion over who was the real Israelite people, right? So you had the temple that was in Jerusalem, that was David's city, like the place that was deemed like this is God's house. And then you have Bethel, which was built because there was this kingdom split, and they also named this as a place where God resided. And they were both practicing, at least at its root, the same religion. But as things changed, as they grew further apart, the religion started to shift and change the way that, just look at Protestantism if you want to see how that happens, right? So the northern kingdom is where Samaria is. And there is a huge discussion coming down even into Jesus's time. Who is the real Israelites? The ones who were exiled into Babylon, or the ones who got to stay not in the southern kingdom, but in the northern kingdom, right? And one of the reasons that Samaritans were looked down on is that they had some intermixing. They married people who weren't of the Israelite nation, and that was deemed like uncouth, unclean, to be quite frank. So there's this ongoing debate of like who has claim over God, right? And in the northern kingdom, we get this like pretty strong prophecy against the people who happen to be inhabiting a land that is known as Samaria. Okay, so fast forward to the Greek Testament. We have a lawyer, a scholar of the law, who is asking, what must I do to inherit the everlasting life, the kingdom of heaven? And what is the answer? What's that? What does the law say? That's true. Yeah, Jesus very rarely answers questions. He answers questions with questions. Very good Socratic method, right? Yes. So what does the law say? And the guy has to articulate for himself. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, your soul, and your mind. Your neighbor as yourself. And I love the phrase, trying to vindicate himself, right? Like, I'm a good person, right? But what he's really trying to do, I think, is trying to get out of loving everyone. So you have to understand that the Samaritans, who like God is pretty ticked off at in the prophet, in that book, Amos, but the way that the Spirit works is these people that we reject actually teach us more about what it means to live a life of faith than the people who are good, right? So we've got a priest and a lawyer who kind of step over the guy like, I don't want to touch him. I don't want to get involved in his life. But who does? These people who were doing religion wrong in the prophet of Amos, who weren't compassionate, now suddenly, that story we had about the Samaritans, how they were unclean, how they didn't do religion right, how they were uncompassionate. Oops, it gets upended, right? Here is this Samaritan who invests in the life of someone who is in need. The same thing that God is saying they aren't doing on a systemic level, and the same thing that God is mad about, in Amos. Weird, right? Oh, these categories we have for people, these ways that we have of measuring or not measuring up suddenly get troubled. But what is the plumb line through it all? That is an actual question. Mercy, compassion, love, the center of right relationship with each other, right relationship with God. This is our plumb line. This is the thing that we build our life together around. Hopefully, even at the foundation of our building is this to keep us pointed. So I want to talk about the practice of confession and absolution, or confession and assurance of grace. So within, I'll say, white liberal Christianity, what we tend to do is shy away from things that make us uncomfortable. So things that make us feel like bad people, right? So that reading from the prophet of Amos probably like made some shoulder blades rise up a little bit, like, ooh, that's some pretty strong words, right? These words of destruction, these words that things are falling apart. The idea that God is even mad is something that we don't necessarily cope well with spiritually, right? I'm going to tell you a story. So Friday morning, it is like 6:45. I am on my couch with my chihuahua on my lap, and I am wearing my Oscar the Grouch pajama pants. They say "Go away," and a tank top. And I've had about 2 sips of coffee. Like I'm just turning the lights on, right? And a young man knocks on my door. He's holding a box of insulin syringes. He says, I'm just trying to get to Springs Rescue Mission for a shower. Can I have a couple of dollars either for a bus fare to get over there or for breakfast? I'm like, okay. I live in a neighborhood where that's not an uncommon experience. I'm like, yeah, of course. I've got some cash in my wallet. I've got some granola bars. I've got some trail mix. Like, he was, this flimsy cardboard box is what he's carrying things in. I said, I got a bag for you. And he says, if you ever need anything done, like around your house or yard work or anything, like let me know. I said, okay. And he says, maybe when I get my together, we can be friends. My name is Adam. And I said, yeah, Adam, I'd like that. He walks away. I haven't seen him since, but it's only been a couple days. But I'm sitting at breakfast. And even though I think I did right by Adam, by giving him what he needed, what he asked for, the question that I was sitting with myself is, why didn't I let him shower in my shower? Why didn't I give him a ride to the rescue mission if that's what he wanted? Right? That even though I did pretty good by this person, the plumb line of how I could have invested in his life showed me that I was a little bit off. There was still a separation between me and him. He had to get his together before I would let him in my house. And that was on me. Not that I didn't sin against him. I didn't say, get off my lawn or anything like that. But there was more I could have invested in his life. So confession and absolution. We have a value set that we espouse. We say we are certain types of people, loving, inclusive, just, merciful, invested in the lives of other people. And sometimes we aren't building quite straight up and down. There is more that we can invest in people's lives. It's not that we're bad. It's that there's more that we have to learn. There's better ways we can build. So I challenge us, and maybe over the next couple of weeks, we will reintroduce the idea of confession and assurance of grace, because what that does is it says we have a plumb line. We are building something, building up the kingdom of God. That's our hope, right? But some of the bricks are a little cockeyed, right? They're a little cockeyed. They're a little just like not where they need to be. So let's take a moment to readjust them. Take a moment to be back in alignment. Take a moment to name what our integrity is and name for ourselves how we can continue to live into that. It's not a judgment. It isn't fire or locusts. It's a measurement tool. It's an opportunity for us to check back in and say, okay, maybe there's something that we can shift, we can adjust. It shouldn't be scary. It just means maybe we have to back up a couple of rows of bricks and build up a little bit. Doesn't mean the foundation's wrong. Doesn't mean that we're bad. It means that we're trying, and that's a good thing. So my prayer for us is that we find our plumb line, that we integrate it into ourselves, that we find our integrity, both as individuals and as a community, and that it leads us to further and further investment, like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, solidarity with our fellow beings, as we are called to do by Jesus, who we say we follow. Amen.